few weeks ago, I opened this bottle for the first time. And the first thing that I thought was, I think this bourbon needed more time. Which is kind of a strange thing to say, because this bourbon spent almost 5 years in a barrel. Now, before anybody hears that and thinks that I'm calling 5-year bourbon young, that's not what I'm saying. 5 years isn't old, but it's not a low number either. The interesting thing isn't the age. The interesting thing is how this whiskey presents itself. Good mouthfeel, nice structure, good bourbon overall. But there's something about it that feels unfinished. Like it almost got there. It feels green, it feels a little bit rough around the edges. It's missing some integration and it lacks some complexity. This bottle comes from Backbone Bourbon, a brand that sources bourbon from MGP rather than distilling it themselves. The Backbone Uncut line is based around MGP's 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% malted barley mash bill. And before somebody takes that as criticism, please don't. Some of my favorite bottles are sourced whiskey. I think sourcing is fantastic as long as it's transparent, fairly priced, and the brands are doing something interesting with the whiskey. What interests me is not where the whiskey came from, it's whether it was ready. Because every once in a while you taste a whiskey that feels like it just needed a little bit more time to come together. And this one is one of those bottles. And that's what got me thinking, age and maturity are not always the same thing. Which raises a bigger question. What actually ages whiskey? Most people would probably say the answer is time. And time is definitely part of it. But if time was the only thing that mattered, we could leave whiskey in a glass jar for 10 years and just expect it to get better over time. And we know that's not how whiskey works. So what else is happening inside the barrel? The first thing most people think about is oak. And honestly, they're not wrong. Oak is one of the biggest contributors of flavor in whiskey. Vanilla, caramel, spice, toast, char, you name it. A huge amount of what we associate with bourbon comes from the barrel. But here's where it gets interesting. We don't usually describe mature whiskey simply as being more oaky. When people talk about older bourbon, they talk about balance, complexity, integration, depth, and the way the flavors work together. Oak adds flavor. Maturity changes the relationship between those flavors. Then there's oxygen. And this is where it starts getting interesting. Because oxygen is not necessarily adding flavor. It's helping the flavors come together. Helping different compounds to integrate over time. Think about a cocktail. Sometimes a cocktail tastes better when it sits there for a minute. Not because you added anything, but because you gave it time to breathe and everything had a chance to settle into place. Now, whiskey maturation is obviously much complicated than that. But the idea that flavors become more integrated over time isn't foreign to us. Then there's temperature. A barrel isn't static. It's constantly expanding and contracting. As temperature rises, whiskey penetrates deep into the wood. As temperature falls, it pulls back. This little piece of oak can give us flavor, but can it recreate years of seasonal temperature swings? Then there's evaporation, the romantic angel share. Every year a barrel loses whiskey, and that sounds like a bad thing, until you realize what's left behind is much more concentrated. Some compounds leave and others stay. The whiskey slowly changes. And this is why I think that sometimes we oversimplify maturation. We talk about age or proof or oak as if one thing is responsible. But maturation is probably all these things and many other variables happening together at the same time. Which leads to the real question: how many of those variables can we realistically recreate ourselves? Let's find out.
First, we need to measure and cut a 3/4 of an inch and a 2-inch piece of our charred wood stick. So here's the plan. One sample stays untouched. No oak. No experiment. This is our baseline. The second sample gets more oak in 2 months. The third gets less oak in a full year. Same whiskey, different variables, different timelines. I'm not trying to make this taste like a 15-year bourbon. I'm not trying to fake age. I'm trying to understand what role these variables actually play. My guess, the 2-month sample is going to change faster. More oak, more extraction, bigger impact. But I think the 1-year sample is a more interesting experiment. Because if maturity is more than oak, then patience might matter more than extraction. Maybe it gets better. Maybe it just gets oakier. Maybe I'm helping this whiskey. Hell, maybe I'm just ruining it. But when I opened this bourbon, I couldn't stop thinking it needed more time. Now we're going to find out if that's something we can actually give it. Because if age and maturity aren't always the same thing, then what actually ages whiskey?